Hello, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of The Guys Who Stared. Stats Cade Kennedy with you, and Tyler Riggs joining along, folks. It's been a while since we've done one of these, the Week 4 recap. We did some of these college football recaps last year. Finally going to get back into it now that we have the time and energy and all this stuff to do it. So, Tyler, first of all, welcome back. It's been a while since we've seen you. Last time was into week 0, week 1. Week 4, pretty interesting week, all things considered. Had some big matchups we'll get into, but it was a fun time nonetheless.
It was, and you're getting into the, I don't want to say it, the meat, the early season meat, right? You're starting to get these big matchups happening in conference, starting to figure out who's really contenders, who's pretenders. So I think we definitely saw a couple of those games this weekend that we'll touch on.
Absolutely. And the first one to get into here will be Texas and Louisiana Monroe. But before we do that, as always, feel free to like the video, subscribe to the channel, leave a comment down below. Tell us what you think about week 4. Do you agree with some of our reactions? Do you disagree? What do we got going on here? And of course, always hit the notification bell as well to do exactly what it says. Stay notified for when videos come out. But starting with Texas here, as always, with the number 1 team in the country, going down the list of the AP poll. I mean, this was the big start for Arch Manning that everyone expected. Everyone wanted to see how well he did. And I mean, you look at the stat line, 15 for 29 really doesn't jump out at you. But 258, 2 TDs, did have the 2 interceptions, but it's one of those games where, once again, you're just dealing with the injury of Quinn Ewers. It's a team you're supposed to beat in UL Monroe, and Texas did exactly what you're supposed to do, a 51-3 win.
Yeah, and this was a game that for Texas, obviously smart to say, okay, we'll not even mess with it. We'll start Arch this week, give Quinn his time off, uh, because this is a team where you could make mistakes. And we saw that from Arch, right? A couple of picks. You could let him make those mistakes, still have his success. You're building confidence. And it's just good film to have back against a far lesser opponent. So it's one of those situations where it's the right spot for Texas. And really going into this next week is kind of a similar deal if they want to against Mississippi State in this conference. But just a good little stretch for them to be able to say, okay, Arch, it's your turn. Fill in while Quinn's resting up and you can go play. And that's kind of the deal. And obviously, the great running game as well helps with that when you got a guy like Jaden Blue that can do what he does. It definitely makes the job a lot easier on Arch.
Absolutely. I mean, you talk about that Texas rushing attack, 239 yards on the ground. When you have that ability to just balance it out, and like we said, this is a game where you come into it, Texas was what, a 40-something point favorite, it felt like. You just needed you don't need another get-right game, considering you just came out of one against UTSA, but just continuing to iron out any kinks before you get into SEC play, always a good thing there.
Texas, by the way, covered the 41.5 point spread.
There we go. I knew it was something ridiculous like that, but that'll take us to the next game that had the similar idea to it. It's a tune-up game. It's getting ready to go into conference play, but that is not how it started for Ohio State against Marshall. This took a very weird turn early on. Marshall, living up to their name, thundering down the field on a long drive, taking up the first eighth of the game, if you want to think about it that way. Half of the quarter, that is an eighth. That is what we call quick math. But Marshall, taking the early 7-0 lead, looked weird for a moment, but then Will Howard, just a simple screen pass, getting over to Emeka Egbuka, and Ohio State right back on track after that like nothing ever happened.
Well, Will did have that pick a little bit later, but still, when you got Quinshawn Junkins running wild on the Thunder and Herd, makes it a lot easier on Will Howard. And this is, you mentioned kind of the fast start by Marshall, if you will, or the opening drive. This is the only thing that kind of worries me about Ohio State, Cade. We've seen this in the earlier season, right, where they've kind of been, I don't want to say lackadaisical. Obviously, you took care of Akron, took care of Western Michigan. But in both those games, there were stretches, especially early, where you thought, okay, when's it going to get going? And kind of had that similar stretch here, but you can't take too much away from it because the quality opponent's just not great. So I'm really curious to see what happens to Ohio State, and specifically Will Howard, as they start getting into these tougher conference games. How does he stand up to that challenge? Because so far he's had great support, but there's going to be a
Yeah, like you were saying, there's going to be
couple
some
games on the
moments.
schedule
Yeah,
where they need him to be able to succeed, to be able to win. So
absolutely. I
if
mean,
he,
absolutely. I mean, you look at the stat line there: 16 for 20, 275, two TDs. The pick you mentioned. It's going to be interesting to see how Ohio State plays out. But obviously, taking care of business here, 49-14. Defense did exactly what it's supposed to do. Offense took care of business. Another solid day. I think, going into this one, it felt like one of the weirder things was going to be about, like, why was Big Noon kickoff here? A lot of people, that seemed to be the weird kind of conversation of the day. And we got a decent game for a little bit. Marshall held their ground, to their credit, as much as you can for a half, but Ohio State just pulling away.
I think it was more of a byproduct of just a bad 11 a.m. slate, right? There's no real standout games at 11 o'clock. So that's Big New Kickoff said, well, we got to go somewhere.
Exactly. I mean, that happens from time to time. But either way, Ohio State taking care of business as you expect them to do against Marshall. But now, Tyler, we have to talk about, as Oklahoma fans, this pains us to talk about, but we have to talk about the not an elephant in the room, more so a aggravating problem for Oklahoma fans. Tennessee, a 25-15 win over Oklahoma that didn't feel as close as that score indicates, but also in a way at the end kind of did.
Yeah, it was one of those games where, and we talked about this kind of at length off air, is the fact that Tennessee clearly was in a hey, let's get our win and get out of here mode. You're missing both of your tackles. That OU defense was absolutely fantastic, minus the couple of big deep shots that Tennessee got. I mean, their run game was very lackluster, and part of that was simple play calling, but the other part is OU was just all over. I mean, yards per carry 2.9 for Tennessee in that game.
Yeah, and I mean, you could
That
look
is
at
not
it.
something that you think, okay, the explosive offense that Tennessee showed that would happen. But man, that Sooner defense was on it, right? They didn't ask Nico to do too much in this game. Smart by Coach Heupel, a first big road start in the SEC. Let's make sure it's kind of a one of those deals where you don't have to put it all on his shoulders. And he did what he needed to do. But even then, OU definitely had him confused most of the game.
Yeah, and I think the story of this one, if you're going to look at, I think the thing everyone wanted to see was how, at least from our perspective, at least, how would Oklahoma's offense react? Everyone wanted to see, you had the bad game against Houston. You had a better game against Tulane, but still not great. And I mean, it was the definition of shooting yourself in the foot for most of that game. And it wasn't deserved by Oklahoma. I mean, if you think about all that goes into this, and we talked about this a lot before we were recording today, I wanted to see how Oklahoma handled this. It's your first ever SEC game. You're playing against Tennessee, obviously, the Josh Heupel connection there. How does Oklahoma come out and play? How do the fans react? How does the entire place react? And I mean, it was, as someone who was there, Norman was absolutely electric. The stadium was just rocking from the kick. And it's just sad, for Oklahoma to come out there, have all this hype behind you, and just watch the defense slowly just have to sit there and know that they can stop Tennessee, but that offense ain't going to help them one bit.
No, and that was pretty evident, when OU is forcing fumbles and you're gifting it to your offense at the 5 and you immediately turn it right back over. I mean, that's got to be one of the most hair pulling situations for any defensive player, any defensive coordinator, and especially your offensive guys, because they don't want to go out there and do that, right? And yes, the injuries are well documented for OU. We know that. We had a couple more in this one. Nick Anderson came back for a seemingly brief moment, then he was out, and it just became a battle of attrition. But I was talking with an older fan. We're talking a 72-year-old diehard OU fan. Okay, so he's seen pretty much most of the modern history. And I asked him, I said, hey, you've been around longer than me. How bad is it in terms of the offense? And he said, simply put, it's the John Blake years, at least, meaning might arguably be worse. Now you could paint some of that as the injury issues, but as we saw, whatever's going on with Jackson Arnold mentally, um, I don't know how you fix that. Does he need a clean break? Obviously, Oklahoma benched him in favor of Hawkins, and Hawkins came in, was immediately a lot more decisive and played with more confidence as the game went on. But man, at some point you gotta say, okay, we know what we got, so how do you scheme around that? So I feel it's almost a shared blame, right? Your players aren't executing, and is your coaching staff on the offensive side doing the best to actually set up their guys that they have for the best possible success? And I can't say that seems to be happening for either.
Yeah, and this was the same conversation we had right after the Houston game. This was the same idea of, okay, what do we do exactly? Because, the offensive line leads to your quarterback situation kind of being messed up. You can't really think about it because you're worrying about not getting sacked. The running game really can't be developed because of that offensive line either. Your receivers are just being hung out to dry, and with all the injuries there, you're asking guys who are 5'7", 5'8" to go block someone who, for Tennessee, they're going to have 6'1", 6'2". They're going to have defensive players that look like grown defensive players out there. And it was just a combination of everything that could have went wrong for 3 straight quarters. Michael Hawkins Jr., credit to him. Coming into the game, just battling through it, play after play, just showing the moxie. A guy who finally looked like he wanted to be out there, despite the terrible situation you're in where the offense just could not do anything all day. At one point, Oklahoma had, I want to say, 98 total yards in the fourth quarter, which would have been one of the 5 worst offensive performances ever in the history of OU football. And I mean, just credit to Oklahoma for able to bounce back there. But also, I do want to give credit to Tennessee, obviously. Tennessee played an amazing ball game defensively, as advertised. You had a D-line that just took advantage of a situation. If you're playing against a weaker offensive line, you should be able to bury them. That's exactly what Tennessee did. Offensively, they looked good. Nico, he did his thing, had some fumbles there, but at the same time, some of that, they had their own O-line banged up situation. Tennessee, though, amazing gameplay in the second half of your Josh Heupel. Just, Oklahoma's not going to score. Let's get out of here and win this thing.
Yeah, and again, if you're a Tennessee fan, you may be, I wouldn't say disappointed, but you're wanting maybe a bit more, right? You wanted to kind of run up the score with all the narrative going into that one. But Coach Heupel knows, like, it's not about the flash now. They're playing for the long term. They're saying, how can we get ourselves to be SEC champions? And it's doing exactly what they did, taking care of business. Doesn't have to be flashy, executing on both sides of the ball and really in all 3 phases. Yeah, you're going to have your bumps, but when you're in a top 25 matchup in the SEC on the road, that's going to happen. It's not going to be a perfect game. We know that. So definitely credit to them. I mean, they did exactly what they needed to control that game. And that's why the score at times felt not quite the full story, right? Because it seemed like Tennessee was just dominating the game.
Absolutely. I mean, once the safety happens in the second quarter and Tennessee goes up 12-3, that felt like, at least for my time, maybe one of the most insurmountable 9-point leads I've ever seen in my life, where it was just absolutely nothing was going Oklahoma's way after that. You were just forced to turnover and then fumble the ball at the Tennessee 5-yard line. Just then you get a safety because of a false start after an amazing punt by the Volunteers. I mean, it was just, okay, nothing is going to go right today. This is just, miscue after miscue after mistake after everything just going against you. Oklahoma still somehow only losing by 10.
Yeah, and that's, if you're a Sooner fan, that's where you take the positive. What'd you figure out in this game? Okay, you found arguably, at least for another week, maybe the guy that could give you some hope going forward in Hawkins Jr. I think he did enough to deserve a start at Auburn, just simply because that's obviously a far less quality opponent compared to what you just saw in Tennessee, and he handled that pressure in the moment very well. So I want to see what he gets in a full week of prep, because the big goal here, Cade, I think you agree with this, is you want to be playing the best football you can by that Texas game. You're going to have this Auburn game, then you'll have a bye week. So you essentially have 3 weeks to evaluate where you are on the offensive side of the ball. And give yourself the best chance, because I think we can both agree this defense is going to give you a chance at any game. As long as they're healthy, they will go toe to toe with any offense you put out there. So, can you find somewhat of a threat offensively? Doesn't have to be perfect, doesn't have to be the Sooners of old, high flying, putting up 50 points, but give your guys something to be hopeful for.
Absolutely. I mean, I 100% agree with you. This is now Hawkins' team. This is now, you got your opportunity. You excelled in it. This is your moment. Let's go get a win at Auburn and head into the much needed bye week. Let everyone try to get as healthy as they possibly can if some people can come back. But for Oklahoma, I've never had the feeling of, can this bye week come faster? Please, we need one.
Typically, this is a program that for whatever reason doesn't handle the bye week well, right? Like, we'll play good into it, and then out of it we look sluggish. So hopefully it reverses itself, because, man, you need it. You just need that rest. You need to be able to catch your breath. Now, of course, is what the worst case scenario is. If you do go on the road, you start Hawkins, and Auburn gives them some fits early, and all of a sudden that becomes a game, and then you're kind of holding on for dear life. That's the worst case scenario. So you definitely want something just clean. Doesn't have to be a big win. Just if you go on the road, win by a touchdown or two, hold the game. That's all you want. It's just what you got to accomplish if you're OU this week.
Absolutely. And before we get off this game, I do want to give a shout out to all the Tennessee fans that made the trip. Absolutely wonderful to talk to. Every single one of them, super friendly, very excited about the Vols, very passionate fan base. And for them, I mean, this was a monumental win for Tennessee. It had been years since they had gone on the road, played a top 15 team, and gotten out of there with a win. So credit to Tennessee there. Fan base could not have been nicer making their way to Norman. So good to see there. But now, finally, time to move on to another Tennessee team. The Commodores of Vanderbilt. They go on the road to Columbia, Missouri, and play one of the weirder games of the week. Missouri escaping at home, a double overtime 30-27 win. And I mean, Tyler, this was one that in the preview video last week, I had the message was, if you're Missouri, you know what you're getting with Vandy. You faced it a little bit last week in Boston College, a team that if they can play a little bit of clock control, they have the ability to run the ball well, get the option game going. Diego Pavia, going to be tough to stop. They did not heed my warning whatsoever. Vanderbilt was in this game until the very end.
Yeah, and how about Diego, man? I don't know how many games Vanderbilt's going to actually win, the rest of the way. But, man, Diego in this offense, fun to watch, chaotic at times, and it seems like they always believe, hey, even when nobody else does, they believe they can go score and get it done. They're just not consistent enough, right? That's why you lose to Georgia State on the road. That's why you don't finish this one off. But we could have been living in a world, Cade, where Vanderbilt could have been 4-0. You get the Georgia State game to go away. You get the breaks in Missouri. Wow, that would be something else. But on the Mizzou side, I mean, I made my thoughts known in the preseason. I think Missouri's a bit overranked. I think there's a lot of flash there, but how much sizzle is there? How much depth is there? They've got top-end talent. There's no doubt about it. But it's games like this that kind of exposes, okay, maybe this team isn't quite ready for that big moment to say, we can go beat Bama. We can go beat a Georgia. And, boy, they escaped it. And sometimes you got to do that in the SEC, but you got to keep your eye on Missouri going forward, because really their schedule's, the rest of the way, and we talked about it in the preseason, right? It's not the worst schedule. You got at Texas A&M October 5th. It's your next game. They get the bye week, so they can reassess some things. After that, though, Massachusetts, Auburn. The big one you circle is at Alabama October 26th. Then they host Oklahoma, which with the state of OU, that's seemingly a game you feel confident in. And then South Carolina, Mississippi State, and Arkansas. So what does Missouri look like coming out of the bye week? Are they more sharp? Are they focused? That's what I'm curious to see.
And I am too. This is a Missouri team that, and you mentioned it. The talent is clearly there. It absolutely 100% is. It's just, can Missouri stay consistent? I feel like that's been the Missouri question for forever. When you have the talent there, can you continue to be consistent with it and produce results? And when you have games like this, no disrespect intended to Vanderbilt whatsoever. They are much improved from what they have been in the past. This is not a game that you should have allowed to even get this far. You should not have allowed this to be a tight game for going into overtime period, but even being tight into that third quarter. This is a game you should be able to firmly take control of.
Yeah, and that's the turn they need to make. There's no question. Like, can you become that team like we see with the Georgias, the Alabamas? Can you just say, "Hey, I'm going to be able to take control of this game and really just finish it off, like win those games you should." I say that's the hallmark of Georgia. Obviously, go to the Kentucky game the week before and maybe not, but it's also part of the SEC. You just got to find a way to be that team that instills a little bit of fear in your opponents.
Absolutely. And so, as we make our way from the SEC back to the Big Ten, a monumental game going on in Ann Arbor, USC and Michigan. Michigan really needing that big quality win, had the opportunity against Texas, obviously couldn't get it done. And a quarterback change, Alex Orji coming in. And I mean, Tyler, if you were to tell me that Alex Orji was going to go 7 of 12 passing, 32 yards through the air, a QBR of 26.7, and Michigan was going to win, I would not have believed you. But that is exactly what Michigan did. The late game heroics, holding on to dear life, had the big stripe out at the stadium, huge game there. Michigan somehow, some way, gets the job done and beats USC.
Well, I mean, Khalil Mullins, Donovan Edwards, they ran as a team for 290 on the ground, 6 yards of carry. That will get it done. It doesn't matter what level of football you're at. It doesn't matter if you throw for 0 yards or 300. You're on the ball like that at home, you're going to get it done. So credit to Michigan there. And for USC, this was the first time I think we really saw Miller Moss kind of struggle, right? Like, obviously, he has moments in this game, but Michigan did a really good job to slow him down. And that's kind of what you're going to have to do with this USC team. Can you find a way to just keep them guessing enough to, hold them to under 30? Because, boy, talk about explosiveness, they've got it on that offense. And their defense is obviously so far much improved this year. So they're going to be in a lot of games. It's just, can you slow them down enough? And Michigan, if this is one of those games, Cade, where if they're on the road, whoever's the home team here pulls it out, right?
Yeah.
Because you get that little extra momentum. And yeah, big for Michigan. That kind of puts them back in the conversation of, okay, are they a contender now again in the Big Ten? I think there's definitely questions after the first few weeks to say, well, clearly they lost too much. Yeah, Texas is better, but it should have been a closer game. And then you kind of meander your way past Arkansas State before this USC game. So definitely big for Michigan to get this one.
Absolutely. I mean, this was one that I'd kind of wondered about going into it. This was the USC Big Ten opener for them, basically. How are they going to handle this? And it's the one thing about Lincoln Riley teams. You can change defensive coordinators around, but how are they going to react when they get punched in the mouth and play a team that wants to play as physical as possible with them? Michigan's a great example of that this year. I mean, Sharon Moore last year had the game where they ran the ball, 30 times in a row against Penn State. Had to do something similar here, 12 passes, 46 rushes. Michigan averaging 6 yards a carry. That's what Michigan wants to do this year. I mean, that is clearly going to be the identity going forward. It kind of has to be, given the quarterback situation. I didn't think Michigan would have it in them to fully take over the game like that. But credit to the Wolverines, absolutely pulling off a much-needed win to stay alive in the conference race, which is weird to say for week one of the Big Ten, but it feels like it's going to be that kind of year. You don't have divisions anymore. You've got Ohio State and Oregon and all these other people to deal with now. Monumental win for Michigan.
Well, and to touch on that, just as a broader topic, people were complaining, oh, the 12-team playoff will make it to where these conference games don't really matter. I think it's the opposite case. Like, and you could give your take on this, but I feel like every week now, for example, down the road when you look at the Oklahoma State Kansas State game this weekend. Um, that one's might as well be an elimination game, right? Whoever loses that probably is on the outside looking in for the conference championship, knowing, well, we're not going to have the ranking to be able to be in the top 12 or in the at large group, I should say, not specifically in the top 12. So, yeah, it makes every week seem just as big, if not bigger, than when we had the 14 playoff.
Exactly. I mean, I agree with you there. I've been in favor of expansion for a long time. I mean, you know me, if we had a 2014 playoff, I'd be okay with it. If we had the exact same setup like the FCS did, that would not bother me one bit. I've always been a more teams the merrier kind of guy when it comes to situations like, you know, and that's every sport. I know people will disagree with me when it comes to your basketball and baseball, softball, things like that. But
I think there's a line there. There is, yeah. I'm not sure if I'm
yeah,
expansion
I
all the
know,
time.
but we'll get to that more when we talk about it down the line. But either way, Michigan just phenomenal in terms of, exactly what you expect them to be. They are a prototypical Big Ten team this year. They're going to have a great defense. Will Johnson had the giant pick six on Miller Moss that I think kind of really changed the direction of this game. It looked like USC, okay, the very rough first half, finding some rhythm. Nope, going all the way back. Big Mo riding with Michigan, and the Wolverines just able to hold on for dear life at the end. Phenomenal drive at the end. Just really impressive for me, Michigan, this weekend. But that will take us to the next one. The one, Tyler, we just brought up, Utah, Oklahoma State. You wanted to talk about that Big 12 race a little bit and how it's already unfolding just in dramatic fashion, as it always seems to do in the Big 12. It's why it's the most entertaining conference in college football, I would say. This is the type of game where that happens. Utah comes in. The big story of the day, will Cam Rising play? Will he not? Game time decision, doesn't play. Isaac Wilson goes out there, and the story was really Utah's defense. As to the surprise of absolutely zero people, Utah's defense does what it is designed to do: shut anybody down. With not, what's the best word to describe it? Not easily at times, but they'll get there eventually. And Oklahoma State had zero answer. Ollie Gordon, once again, not being able to get going in the run game. That's been a problem for Oklahoma State all season. That's what happens when you have an insanely good running back. And Alan Bowman just not able to make the big throws in the first half. He gets benched. Garrett Rangel comes in for a little bit. That fixes absolutely nothing. They go back to Bowman. Oklahoma State has a big comeback late, down 22-3. They start rallying back, look like, okay, they're going to make a game out of this late. But time runs out for them. Utah clamps down and holds on to a much needed win to start Big 12 play.
Yeah, and you talk about this Utah defense. I liken it to, I would call it the Floyd Mayweather style of boxing. Floyd Mayweather, say what you want about him, best defensive boxer of all time, right? He'll take some shots. You'll get a couple in on him, but you're never going to really knock him out. And he's going to find a way throughout the course of a fight, not only to wear you down, but find that weakness. And that's what you see with this Utah defense. I mean, they will very play to play almost adjust, react, and find a way to say, okay, we're going to get you at that weak point. You might hang around, but we're going to find a way to eventually do enough to just get that decision. And that's what they did. I mean, they made Alan Bowman won National Player of the Week coming into this game against Tulsa, right? And he gets benched. Now, you could question, is that Gundy overreacting, whatever, but it's clear that he's got a short leash. Utah knows, like every other team does, hey, as long as we don't give it up to Ollie Gordon, we're going to win this game if we force Bowen to beat us. And we saw Arkansas try that, didn't quite have the talent to do so. Tulsa sold out to do that last week for whatever reason. Bowman tore him up. But that's what OSU season is coming down to, is basically, okay, everybody knows Ollie Gordon's special, so we're going to force Alan Bowman to beat us. The problem here, Cade, is, and this is where it kind of diverts from the OU situation, because we were talking about this, how they paralleled a lot this week. The difference is Oklahoma State doesn't have the injuries, right? They've got arguably the best line in the country. That line to this point has been disappointing. Let's be honest about it. They have not lived up to what they've needed to do. And so that's got to change because there is no reason, even with the stacked box, Ollie Gordon is a special enough running back. You've got to find a way to get him some cleaner initial 2, 3 yards. There's not enough push going on there. And so when that's happening, that makes your team average, especially on the offensive side. So how can they correct that? I mean, again, you've got one of the most experienced lines in the country and arguably one of the deepest and best. So those guys have to challenge themselves and say, okay, this isn't acceptable. You should be beating every defensive line you come across.
Absolutely. And I mean, it's interesting looking at it. Just, have the stats in front of you. You look at Ollie Gordon, 11 carries, 42 yards. Longest was 18. So you take one explosive play away, and we're talking 2.4 yards a carry. I mean, we were talking about absolutely getting shut down. And I mean, we talked about this. That is what Utah does. They will find a way to shut you down. And when you can make it a rock fight, when you can slow the game down, when you can let someone like Micah Bernard go off and just start grinding the ball away, get your 3, 4, 5 yards, just keep on rolling. That's a recipe for success. That's how Kyle Whittingham's always done it. That's how Utah's done it for a long time. Doesn't really seem to matter who the quarterback is at times. Isaac Wilson had some good plays, had some bad plays. You expect that sometimes with Utah's quarterback situation the past few years when Cam Rising's not playing. But Utah just another impressive game for them. If they wanted to come in and win the Big 12 year one, like a lot of their fans felt they had the ability to do, you needed to make a statement win, and you needed to make it immediately. You got the best opportunity to do it, and Utah took full advantage of it.
Yeah, the one thing I'll say for Utah, though, is okay, we know you're a Big 12 contender, if not favorite at this point. You've got to get Cam Rising back healthy if you want to be in conversation for the national side of things once you get the college football playoff. Because I think the defense is talented enough to argue it's championship caliber with the proper offensive support. So Utah is on that edge. Can they vault themselves into actual true championship contenders? I know that sounds crazy with how deep the SEC is, but if any team's built to do it, Utah is. You're right. We've seen them do this in the Pac-12. You move up at that conference and you kind of dominate it outside of Oregon getting the occasional one on the move because you build that program from ground up. You find the right guys to match your system and you go execute. That's what you need to be able to do to be a championship contending team. So can they get Cam Rising back? And that's kind of the missing piece because it feels like, Cade, at least early, they've got everything they need to be a legit actual contender, not just a playoff team.
Absolutely. And the thing about Cam Rising, with him being back, Utah looks a lot different, obviously. You hit on that point. But what I'm waiting for, and this may not happen this year, this is just me throwing pure speculation out there, but there's always going to be one game where your defense can only do so much. And when is that game going to be for Utah? It may not happen. Utah's a talented enough defense to prevent things like that from happening. But you saw it at the end of this game where Oklahoma State starts making that comeback, and here we go. Now it's 22-11. Now it's 22-19, where things are starting to tighten up a little bit. When is that dam going to break for Utah? Because if it happens, this is the Big 12 we're talking about. Things get weird at the flip of a coin, at the drop of a hat, whatever you want to say. Can Utah survive that moment when it comes? Or even if it comes? But that's a different discussion, I think, for another day. But that will move us on. We're not done talking about the state of Utah because there is another team that pulled off a maybe more impressive win just in terms of expectations. BYU just absolutely going to town on Kansas State. 38-9. BYU just putting a poor Kansas State fan in a bad situation. I'm not going to explain it to you. You can find that out for yourself on Twitter. Kansas State just looked absolutely pathetic in this game. And I mean, Kansas State has games like this every once in a while where Avery Johnson looked like a young quarterback. He made mistakes like a young quarterback would. That's expected. It's just, you don't think it's going to happen after the performance they put up last week against Arizona.
Yeah, and that's what the confusing part is, right? Like, say what you want about Avery Johnson. Is he playing like a young quarterback at times? Yes, but you look at those first 3 games, and he didn't really do anything to lose you the game for the most part. You know, um, he did what was asked of him, right? Didn't try to go over the top a lot of times, just did what was needed and showed off that dual threat ability. But this game was kind of the first time we really saw him exposed in that sense, and it parallels to you in a lot of ways. What was the question preseason, Kate? It was okay. You know you've got a talented roster. You've got a lot of the right pieces. Can your young quarterback take that next step? And early on, it looks like Johnson at times is, but then you get this little hiccup. So uh, it seems Kansas State may, unfortunately, for their fan base, be just a bit outside ready for the moment. Like they'll they'll be an 8-9 win team, but I don't think they're quite ready for the moment of saying, okay, we're here, we own this conference. And everybody in this Big 12 conference right now is obviously trying to vie to be the new face. That's the thing. Who's going to establish that first signature championship because it's new opportunity with Oklahoma and Texas gone. So, uh, in that race, unfortunately for Kansas fans, you may be just a bit behind this year.
Yeah, and I mean, just looking at this for Kansas State, I mean, this is the, if you want to talk about, the anatomy of an upset, how games like this happen, you have 3 turnovers for Kansas State. Avery Johnson throws 2 picks, he threw a fumble in as well. BYU gets a special teams touchdown. They get a scoop and score TD. They get all sorts of different things to go their way. When you start turning the ball over like that, you know what's going to happen. A good team's going to take advantage of that, and that's exactly what BYU did. And also, this is something touched on a little bit in the preview video. Provo at night is not a fun place to play. There's an atmosphere out there that when they are kind of that game all by themselves or in that late night window, it is really difficult to win out there. BYU plays much better at night than they seem to do in the early afternoon or morning, and they took full advantage of that. That was a raucous crowd to have to deal with. It was an insane atmosphere, and BYU just taking care of business. The next one, however, a little interesting. LSU and UCLA, a game that you really didn't think was going to be close. I mean, LSU was they might have been a 20-point favorite in this one. I can't remember off the top of my head, but you look at it and it's a 17-17 game at halftime, Tyler. I mean, this was one where it just was confusing. I mean, you want to talk about the ultimate head scratcher of head scratchers. It was this game where LSU, once again, playing an opponent that they're better than. You saw what happened to UCLA the week before where Indiana just trounced them. And LSU's out here struggling for another half. And then eventually they get up, pull away in the second half, have no problems there. Defense steps up. And then you get the unfortunate news that LSU's defense just continuing to take beating after beating. Harold Perkins Jr., just the big injury there, going to be out. And that's difficult for LSU to have to overcome.
Yeah, it is. I mean, that's when you talk about college football and really, you know, high level football, you've got to have those edge rushers, right? And when you lose a piece like that, all of a sudden, and we've seen it on the college side, the pro side, you lose a guy like that, your defense becomes a lot more average than you would like. So, with LSU kind of getting into a stretch going forward where you'll have that game against Ole Miss coming up, you'll have that game against Alabama coming up. Those are ones that you want to be able to be highly competitive in and take, especially with you hosting those games. That's the big deal. That's a huge blow, though, to try to recover from. The good news, I guess, is that you're going to have kind of a tune up to figure things out. You got South Alabama coming to you this next week. So that's your one opportunity to say, okay, and a bye week afterwards, I should mention, too, before Ole Miss. You got that window to try to figure things out, but it's just, you're not going to be near as effective without a guy like that in the lineup.
Absolutely. I've harped on LSU a lot for it this season. The defense just concerning at times, but I'll take it a step in the opposite direction. I'll be positive here. Garrett Nussmeier played amazing. I mean, you look at the stats here, 32 for 44, 352, 3 TDs, absolutely just making big play after big play, great throws, did exactly what you're supposed to do in a situation like that. he looked fantastic. I mean, there's nothing bad I could say about LSU's offense besides maybe, would have liked to see a little bit more Cade Durham. I understand 6 carries, 14 yards, wasn't doing a whole lot there. But after the big week he had before that against South Carolina, would have liked to see a little bit more of him. I'm also biased towards Oklahoma kids, so, that's just me. But at the same time, LSU doing what you're supposed to do.
Yeah, and I think Nussmeier is going to have to be the guy. And it's strange how LSU is slowly becoming more of a primetime quarterback university, right? I mean, you say that knowing they've got Jamarcus Russell in the tank from the days of old, but that was kind of seemingly an outlier in their history. Now they're constantly starting to produce some guys that, you go back to Jane Daniels last year. Yeah, your defense wasn't great, but obviously he was electrifying. And Nussmeier's really had some big flashes early in the season. So can he kind of catch fire, if you will, and be able to carry you in some of these big environments?
And I think that's what LSU is going to have to become. As much as you hate to see it for them, they're going to have to turn into what they were last year. Your offense is going to have to carry you because, again, if your defense can't get the big stops, you're going to have to make every game a shootout. That is not a fun situation to be in. LSU had to do it last year, obviously, but it might have to be that way again. It very, very well could. But the next game to talk about, Tyler, tell me if you've heard this one before. I'm going to use the exact same bit I did from the preview. This is Notre Dame playing a MAC school as a 27.5-point favorite. Tell me if you've heard that one before. You might have.
Might have, yeah.
But this time, Notre Dame comes out and plays a lot better. Number one, Riley Leonard threw a touchdown pass. Notre Dame has a passing touchdown on the season from their starting quarterback. It only took 4 games, but they finally did it. And
The champagne bottle.
I know, yeah. He got the 2 TDs on the ground. Leonard looked good. I mean, you could say, yes, it's an 0-3 Miami of Ohio team, but 28-3, not a bad result for Notre Dame, honestly. I mean, considering we've already seen the opposite end of the spectrum here, you just want to continue to get better every week. I'm sure that's exactly what Coach Freeman would say. You're just trying to improve every single day. And that's what Notre Dame did here. This was another game where you can look at it and be like, hey, you have Louisville next week. You have a big game to deal with. But they didn't get caught napping this time. And boy, I don't know what world we would have been in if that happened. Notre Dame's defense, absolutely phenomenal, forcing turnovers, taking care of business on that side of the ball. And Notre Dame's offense, even though it still sputters at times, it looked more consistent when it needed to be.
Yeah, but here's the problem. I don't think they've played a good team yet. Northern Illinois lost this week to Buffalo. Maybe a little bit of hangover from their, high of highs, if you will. And Texas A&M, which we'll get to, didn't look that great either this week. So that's your win you can hang your hat on, but I don't know if it really means much because they've kind of struggled. So is this just an average Notre Dame team? This Louisville game, I hate to put emphasis on one game, especially early in the season, but we'll really find out what Notre Dame is this week. Like, this to me is going to tell us what they are because I think Louisville's actually a legitimate team. You kind of some of these ACC schools we've seen in the past seasons, Cade, where you kind of go, I don't know, especially early in the season. But I think Louisville's got what they need to at least challenge for that ACC title. So if Notre Dame could actually pull up and play a complete game there, then okay, they were just kind of sluggish. But a lot's riding on that game, I think.
It is. And speaking of Louisville, that is the next team we're going to talk about. They get the 31-19 win over Georgia Tech. To me, this was the game I wanted to see from Louisville. I didn't know if they were going to have it in them to beat Georgia Tech. Georgia Tech coming off kind of the weird past few weeks they've had. You have that loss to Syracuse. You try to bounce back from that, continue to see, hey, let's get right back in the conference race here. And to Louisville's credit, like you said, they look the part of being legit. I wanted to see something from them. Tyler Shuck, efficient, 13 for 19, not the greatest, completion percentage out there. Still pretty good, though, but 269 through the air, 2 TDs, just absolutely phenomenal work there on a day where Louisville couldn't run the ball at all. Passing game, took off and did exactly what you want to see. You want to see Louisville air it out? That's how you do it.
Yeah, and that's impressive considering obviously they still don't have, Lacey on the outside. They're going to be without now Jaden Thomas Thompson the rest of the season after he suffered a knee injury in the win. So to see that passing game still function without some big time weapons, that's got to be good news because you're probably going to get Lacey back soon. I say that somewhat soon. Um, because he's begun practicing again. But you pick that back up, that's a big threat, and then this thing could really get humming for Louisville. So, and with a win like this, it's one of those that's a knots in the belt. We've seen Georgia Tech do some really good things early in the season. Now you just got to take all that good juju, if you will, and channel that into that Notre Dame game because that's where you want to make the big statement. They've kind of flown under the radar early season because you haven't had the best quality opponents. This is where you're now. It's hey, we're here. We're an actual contender in the ACC.
And the ACC race is going to be interesting to keep an eye on. I know it's only week 4 that we're talking about recapping here, but you have Miami, who we did not talk about in this video. They took care of business against South Florida. But Louisville's starting to establish themselves, kind of like Clemson, is hey, we're not Miami, but we're not out of this by any means whatsoever. Season's still pretty young. Like I said, this was an impressive game, at least to me, for Louisville to show that, okay, we're playing an opponent we should beat, and they covered. I mean, what do we say, Tyler? Good teams win, but great teams cover. Cardinals,
Exactly.
big job there. So I'm proud of them. Getting to see Tyler Shuck play well. Great to see. Next one on the docket, though, is that Clemson team we were just talking about, at least momentarily. And if you would have told me the final score of this game was going to be 59-35 with the Tigers winning the Textile Bowl, I wouldn't have believed you. That this was a game that was over in 10 minutes. It wasn't even over in 10 minutes, it was over in 5. You want to talk about a barrage to start the game from Clemson. Just score after score, forcing turnovers, just everything you could have dreamed of to go Clemson's way happened in that first half. It was just an absolute smackdown. Cade Klubnik looked fantastic. 209, 3 TDs. Phil Maffa, 7 carries for 107 and a TD. So you can see on your screen, if you're watching this, 15 yards a carry. Like, my goodness, just absolutely plowing over people. And NC State had no answers until the end of the game. That's because you're going up against backups. CJ Bailey got thrown into his first start. And to be fair to CJ Bailey, going up against a talented Tiger defense like this is, I thought he played fine.
Yeah, you're on the road. You're kind of flung into the mix, right? Against a very talented defense. You weren't perfect, but you did enough to bring your team back into it. Unfortunately for NC State, you get that slow start. You kind of question, okay, how much of the nerves were there? If you don't get kind of a nervous NC State squad here, is this a bigger game? And that leaves me more question marks about Clemson. Tough team to judge right now. You don't look great against Georgia. Your defense looked good for a half, and then Georgia pulled away. You took care of App State in a high scoring affair for your offense there. Klubnik, looks near perfect, and you get out to such a great start, but you kind of let slip on the back end of this one. So how's that fare week to week into conference play? That's what's puzzling me about this Clemson squad, Cam. I'm kind of on the fence though about him. I think Klubnik clearly has potential to be that guy. Uh, he's flashed it enough over the last 2 weeks for that to be the case. But can they be consistent as a team to do what needs to be done? Because if you get to the end of the regular season and this Clemson team's only loss is that Georgia game, well, as long as they're not going against an 8-4, 8-5 team in the conference championship, they could probably afford to lose that and still be in that large. If that conference championship is Miami or something like that, and you drop that, you could be a 10-2 team and make the legitimate case to be in the playoff if you're Clemson at that point. It's just, can you not get snuck up on? Your road contest, at least right now, don't seem tough. At Florida State, obviously abysmal. At Wake Forest, at VTech, at Pitt, you still got to play Louisville and Virginia, though. Those games are at home, but those are kind of the ones. Can you avoid those pitfalls, if you will, and put yourself in a really good situation for the postseason.
Yeah, and Tyler, you talk about Clemson kind of being an enigma right now. I think the more and more we've seen from Clemson these past few weeks, last week you could make the observation that, well, App State's defense is just that bad. And you'd be proven right. South Alabama absolutely went to town on them. But
Mm-hmm.
I think Clemson's just a good team that ran into the buzzsaw that is Georgia. I think
Yeah,
the offense is clearly there. I think this was a Clemson team that I think people wanted to see come out motivated, come in. It's a rivalry game. You know what can happen against a team like NC State. Every conference has a team like NC State where they're going to be the ultimate wild card. You never know what you're going to get from them. You come out, you establish yourself on both sides of the ball. Even, special teams doing well as well. But Clemson they played another, not a perfect game, obviously, but that's what happens when you let second and third string guys get in there and you got threes against ones. They're going to get burnt. That's going to happen. That's just a fact of football. But I think Clemson, for those 3 quarters, you could look at it, they played nearly as perfect as you could. So Clemson, perhaps treated a little bit too harshly to start the year.
I think the jury's still out. We'll get those answers in the coming weeks as you get into those kind of dog days of conference play, if you will.
We will have to see. The jury's still going to be out on them, but it's time to move on to another team that we expect a lot from this year. The expectations are continuing to rise with every single game. We're, of course, not talking about Nebraska. We're talking about Illinois. Illinois going into Lincoln, getting the big win. The Fighting Illini are 4-0, Tyler. And I want to tell you something about this Illinois team. This is something that, looking up some of their games, you want to talk about a statement game, they beat Kansas. Kansas was supposed to be a good team. This was a huge statement game for Nebraska. It was a bigger statement game for Illinois that, hey, we can come in and beat a top 25 team, riding the hype as well. And Luke Altmaier, we got to talk about a guy just casually doing his job. 21 for 27, 215 through the air, 4 TDs. You don't think of Illinois as a passing team. You never think of a Brett Bielema coach team as a team that's going to air it out. But Illinois, just doing exactly what they're supposed to do. You give Altmaier the plays to just be a competent quarterback. Don't need to do anything too flashy. Just make the simple reads. That's what Illinois does. They rely on their great defense and just put together one of the most demoralizing sequences of events I've ever seen in an overtime period for any team whatsoever. Just Nebraska, what are we doing here in overtime? I mean, you knew it was going to go sideways once you get a penalty to start, and it just spiraled from there.
Yeah, it was Nebraska team that lost its composure at home, which when
Well, there we go. Got you back.
yeah. So a Nebraska team that lost their composure at home, knowing the game was on the line, and for Matt Rule, that's got to be frustrating. You almost feel like this program is cursed, no matter who they've got at head coach, to not be able to finish off this game. But you go back to Altmaier, yeah, I would just classify it as efficient. That's all you need sometimes, especially in college football in these big moments. We talk about games not being perfect in these top 25 matchups, right? It's rare somebody goes out and just plays an absolute perfect game. You lost 2 fumbles if you were the Illinois offense, but otherwise, this was about as clean as you could get from that perspective. Like I said, the defense kept you around in it when you had some moments. It got you that OT, and you did what was needed to be done. So, big boost for the Illinois confidence. The problem is, going forward, can you, against much better talent, be able to play that same efficient style? Because you've got Penn State next week, so you got to work it on the schedule. Both those road games. Michigan now looks a lot tougher, although you host them. That's the big thing. What can this Illinois team be? Can you be just a, dare I say, old school Michigan State team? Well, you think back to Kirk Cousins there. He didn't always sling the rock. He had some moments, but it wasn't always just him throwing for 300-400 yards. They were precise. They were efficient. Can they be that type of team in the Big Ten this year?
Yeah, and I think Illinois has that potential with them. I think this was one of those, like you mentioned, the giant confidence boost. Anytime you can go in front of 90,000 people and pull off a big game like this that Nebraska desperately needed. I mean, they hadn't had a game
Desperately.
a,
Oh,
a game of this caliber in 13 years. How long it had been, or yeah, it's been a long time since they've had a top 25 matchup for Nebraska. You're coming off the hype of the Colorado game. This starts to enter that, is Nebraska finally getting to where they're supposed to be? And for a while, it looked like it. It looked like, okay, this is Nebraska having to grind it out against a solid Illinois team that's already proven themselves a little bit earlier in the year. Don't know how good Illinois is yet. Don't know how good Nebraska fully is yet. And Nebraska had an opportunity, and they just let it slip right through their hands. And Illinois, what do good teams do? They take advantage of those mistakes. You're able to survive a missed field goal that would have knocked you out of the game. You get right back. You go to overtime, score immediately, and then just break the will of Nebraska and their fan base in just 4 plays.
tough to see, but also the ups and downs, the joys of college football. Hey, we get to benefit from it, reacting to it.
Absolutely. I mean, this was a fantastic game to watch on Friday night. I've got to stop trying to predict what games of the week are going to be. I am 0 for 2 on this. I tried to, hey, last week, Arizona K-State, Friday Night Fox. That's going to be a lot of fun. And then this one, it was, hey, it very well could be, but I'm not going to pull the trigger on it. And Tyler, I should have pulled the trigger on it. This might have been the game of the week, but we've got another one to get to because we talk about Maction on this channel, and we like to have our fun when it comes to, every once in a while when we get to highlight some of the smaller teams that make the sport fun as well. And Northern Illinois, you're coming off the biggest win in program history. You have a bye week to kind of get it out of your system, and Buffalo steps in and says, not today. Northern Illinois, the MAC is a front runner, maybe to somehow, of all years, pull that spot in the 12-team playoff. That dream is probably now dead. Buffalo, 23-20 win over Northern Illinois.
Yeah, and here's the kind of sneaky part for Buffalo, right? Their loss is to Missouri.
Yep.
You're on the road, so if you're Buffalo, find some early season confidence. What better way to do it than go on the road, knock off the team that just got the biggest win in conference history? And now it seems like this is every year of the Batcade, but it's always up for grabs, right? Who's going to emerge? Dare you say, can Buffalo kind of make I wouldn't say they get there, but could they make an argument if they run out and you look at the end of the season, they're MAC champs, they're only lost to Missouri? Hey, they can make a case. We should be in it, right? So that's what makes, I think, the 12-team playoff beautiful is the fact that you've got teams like Buffalo, like Northern Illinois, that can kind of seize those opportunities. And unfortunately, for Northern Illinois, Buffalo kind of realized that in this game a bit more and just able to do enough to pull it out. Maction gets crazy. This one was a classic.
It was. I mean, this is one of those, if you want a perfect example of Maction, this is it. I mean, you throw all the context into it as well. Just, okay, Northern Illinois, here you go, big game, continue the momentum, not happening. Just absolutely stuffed out in the second half. And credit to Buffalo. I mean, Buffalo's defense playing pretty solid football. I mean, anytime you can hold a team to 6 points for a half, you're going to be doing something right. So good to see for Buffalo. And now the question is, like you said, Tyler, how far can Buffalo take their luck? Can they pull something off here, or will Maction claim another victim in the next few weeks?
I don't know, but you talk about that Buffalo defense. How about Sean Dolek and Red Burdock? 25 solo tackles between the two. They were all over the place. Man, I mean, that's what makes Maction great. You get some of those kind of wild performances, whether it's on the offensive side or defensive side of the ball. And, we know this is a conference that produces talent. They've had some guys come through. And, man, it just is one of those deals where I guess for Buffalo going forward, if you're a fan out there, can you find a little bit more offensive juice? You're going to need it at times throughout the season. It seems like every once in a while there will be a MAC game that just gets into a random shootout. If that's you, can you survive it? So that'd be the question going forward. And it's just the week-to-week consistency. So keep building, though. You never know what's going to happen.
Absolutely. Also, final note on this one because it's an all-time bad beat looking at it. The over-under in this game was 42.5. And there were 43 combined
Um,
points. Just
I,
absolutely. This is why
I
you don't bet on Maction, Tyler. You do not
I
bet
don't
on
subscribe
the
to bad
crazy.
beats.
You don't
If you're
subscribe to
playing
bad
about
beats?
not in football, it's got to be something really heinous to uh, qualify for that. Very rare. I think the term bad beats gets overused in football. Now, basketball, where sometimes, the ball has mind of its own, it seems, that I'm more sympathetic to. But in football, it's got to be something really wacky for me to sympathize with the bad beats crowd.
Alrighty. Well, we're going to talk about something that was almost a bad beat for an entire different reason. Texas A&M holding on to dear life against Bowling Green. Now, Bowling Green did this before. They played Penn State really tough. That was another one of those head scratching. Oh, are we really doing this today? Is Bowling Green just that good? The answer might be yes. I mean, Connor Bazelak just had another okay performance compared to what he was able to do against Penn State. Only 20 for 36, but still 250 through the air. Had a TD, had a pick, but other than that, I think the main question of this game going into it was what was Texas A&M going to do at quarterback. They stayed with Marcel Reed. I think that was the right decision going into the game. But man, Texas A&M has just got to figure it out a little bit more offensively. You cannot try to just continue to jab away with, okay, we're going to keep putting up, mid 20s, things like that, because you're going to run into games like this where Bowling Green could punch above their weight. They're going to hang around. They're going to hang around even more. You've got to deliver a knockout blow to them. And if your offense can't deliver it, you get a weird result like this.
Yeah, and Texas A&M for their part, they admitted they were flustered after the first drive. So you're against Bowling Green, you're at home. You can't be flustered. You're an SEC team. You don't have room for that. So that's we talked about it with the Clemson deal. What is this Texas A&M team truly? What are they? I don't think we have a good answer yet. Because you go back to that loss against Notre Dame, and it's like, okay, you expect Notre Dame to carry on, and for the most part, A&M. I mean, obviously, you rebound against McNeese in Florida, but even those two games had some moments where it's like this isn't looking great. I also shed a tear for a world, Cade, where we could have had a 3-0 Bowling Green team that would have had road wins over Penn State and A&M. I mean, that would have been with Bazelak leading the way as a Dayton guy. That would have been just absolutely scenes, cinema, you name it.
I mean,
They would
we,
have
we,
probably
we could
lost
have just,
somewhere on the road after that.
I mean,
But
we
maybe
could have,
Bowling Green is the sneaky good team in the MAC. Who knows?
maybe. I mean, if they were 3-0, we could have just ended the season there and just crowned them champions of life or whatever term you want to use there, national champions in our heart, whatever you'd want to say about that. But unfortunately, that is not the way things go. But for Texas A&M, just another head-scratching week of football where you're the better team. I mean, but that's why you play the game. You got to see whatever weird result A&M always seems to put themselves in. It's just, unfortunately for them, a fact of life of being Texas A&M. You get weird
Yeah.
results like this. You just don't question it. You come to accept it.
It gets at points in the season where you say, hey, just get out of there with the win, call it a day, right? So that's kind of where they're at. Can you do that? Can you just survive in advance, move on a little bit? That's your big question.
And that will, speaking of calling it a day, that will wrap things up here for the week 4 recap. Hard to think that we're already a third of the way through the season for some teams, Tyler. I mean, as we continue to try to develop an idea on who these teams are, it's going to be fun to see because we're going to start getting those giant matchups, conference play opening up now. The race is truly on with the 12-team playoff this year.
It is, and just the final point on that. I know we've hyped it up, but the one thing I truly appreciate about expanded playoff is that you go from each team feeling like at the top they've got to be perfect all season to you may get, let's say, an Oklahoma State that stumbles right against Utah early. They rebound, they turn it on down the stretch. All of a sudden, they're playing the best football in college, and they work their way back into the playoff picture. You win it, whatever. That's what will be exciting about this system is the fact that it does leave room for growth for some of these programs. You could falter a little bit. The pressure's not to be perfect. It's can you capitalize on your opportunities and can you do it in a way where you're peaking at the right time. So that's going to be a very interesting factor to follow as we go throughout the season because that happens in pro sports, right? We see it in the NFL, see it in the NBA, the MLB. Can you peak at the right time on top of how having the talent necessary to be able to get it done? I look forward to seeing what teams rise and fall within that frame.
I'm looking forward to it too. This is always kind of that. Well, I'm never going to say there's a bad time for college football, obviously, but this is once we start to get to that middle of the season, we really start to get those big matchups. We start to get those big upsets. We start to really get to see the season turn into what it's going to be, and to see everything just developing in real time is always a treat.
We're at the point where we finish the appetizer, right? Go, hey, that was pretty tasty. But now you get the hot steaming plate coming out, the main course, the entree. It's around the corner. Your mouth starts watering. You're hungry again. That's where we are in college football. So it should be a lot of fun over the next couple of weeks as things start to solidify with some of these bigger matchups.
I could not have said it better myself. And now you've made me hungry. Thanks, Tyler. But
You're welcome.
either way, folks, as always, that will do it for this episode. So once again, feel free to like the video, subscribe to the channel, leave a comment down below. Tell us what you thought about week 4 this year. You know, what are some of your reactions, takeaways, things like that. And as always, feel free to hit the notification bell as well to stay notified for when new videos come out, because we should have a week 5 preview coming out pretty quick this week. Tyler will be back for that. But folks, until next time, have a good one, everybody.